Iowa. A woman is found savagely murdered in her vehicle.
She had a horrific injury to her hand. It almost took her thumb off.
Her name is Tracy Mondabaugh, and police suspect the ex-wife of Tracy's current boyfriend. Her name is Michelle Boat.
She unleashed hell on Tracy that day. She was just not able to deal with her marriage falling apart.
I think in her head, she felt that if she removed Tracy from the situation, that Nick would come back to her.
It doesn't take police long to find out just what their suspect has been up to.
Michelle had been following Tracy around town for quite a while that evening. She stalked Tracy and then killed her.
And Michelle's own words provide damning evidence.
And tell the she messed with the wrong mama.
Every one of the things that she did was a free will choice, to the point that she plunged a knife into Tracy's heart.
This is the story of Tracy Mondabaugh's murder and how it was solved. The story of a determined killer driven by rage and by jealousy. May 18th, 2020. Police in the city of Pella, Iowa, receive a call about a possible domestic dispute.
Pella Police Department.
Yeah, I live over at 21 Glenwood. I just went outside to smoke a cigarette, and what looked like a scuffle between a couple. Well, when I saw her get out of the truck, her face is just all bloody.
Do you have any idea what apartment she might have went in?
No, she looks like she just got in the car and left. Looked like a Cadillac, almost cream or light-colored off-white.
She witnessed what she thought was a domestic incident, and a couple people arguing in the parking lot, and then when one of the people came around the corner, the witness said that she was covered in blood. And so that obviously was very alarming.
Shortly afterwards, police arrive on the scene.
Call a fireman ambulance. I got someone that's laying in the driver's seat of the pickup. Doesn't look like they're responding. Lots of blood. Bleeding from the hand. Really large open wound. Ma'am, are you awake? Hello?
They found a body. They didn't know exactly how long it had been there, or the extent of the injuries, and so they attempted to perform CPR. It was unsuccessful.
You start to look at the area around her body, and you could see that there was a struggle. Her purse had been knocked out. Some of her personal items, her teeth, she wore dentures, were on the ground as well. And then you could barely see into the cab of the truck, but you could see immediately that there was a tremendous amount of blood.
Using her driver's license, police are able to identify the victim as Tracy Mondabaugh. Police are soon able to find out more about Tracy.
This whole thing was a tragedy. She had people that loved her, and for the most part have been living her life, well.
Her children described her as a very loving mother and a very nice person, just kind of trying to figure out her way through life.
Tracy had been dating Nick Boat. He is separated from his wife of over 20 years and works at a local industrial and agricultural supplier, Vermeer Corporation.
Her family was happy that she had met Nick and that Nick treated their mom well.
He had begun seeing this woman while married to Michelle Boat, and at some point he told Michelle that he was leaving her to go live with Tracy.
I believe he described it as the love of his life, and that he now, for the first time in his life, knew what love really was.
So Tracy and Nick moved in together, and the truck was Nick Boat's truck. Tracy had dropped Nick off for work, had the vehicle that day, took him lunch from Burger King, and had come back to their apartment after dropping off and having some lunch with him.
This was the last time Tracy was seen alive. Crime scene investigators begin to examine the scene and look for evidence.
Well, first and foremost, when law enforcement arrived and the Pella Police Department were wearing body cameras, you could tell that the victim was still seatbelted in. That was important, at least from my perspective, because it demonstrated an ambush attack.
It is also clear that there has been a violent struggle.
You can tell Tracy fought back. She had a horrific injury to her hand. It almost took her thumb off.
She had what many people refer to as defensive wounds on her hands, and then she had a single stab wound to her chest.
According to our medical examiner, that puncture of her heart terminated her heart from beating, and so it was just mere seconds, I think. Probably less than 30 seconds, and I hope for Tracy's sake it was shorter than that.
One small but vital clue catches the attention of the police.
At the crime scene, they had found what looked like a finger off of a blue latex glove. Just the finger looked like it had been ripped off of the glove.
Everyone, whether or not it's law enforcement or the EMT crews, firefighters, they wear purple gloves. So the fact that we had a blue glove at the scene, this stood out to us.
Investigators also learned something of enormous interest from some bystanders.
There was a male and a female standing outside, and he told me that a lighter colored, he couldn't remember, silver or white vehicle with a Vermeer sticker in the front windshield had left the scene before the officers arrived.
Through his dealings with Nick and Michelle, Lieutenant Cox immediately put it together that that was Michelle Boat's Cadillac, which was a critical blessing that Lieutenant Cox was able to put that all together very quickly.
Armed with this information, investigators are now able to track down Michelle Boat and pay her a visit.
She lives probably less than 1.5 miles from the crime scene. When they knocked on the door, not a whole lot happened initially because she didn't answer the door. I think by the body footage we were able to calculate that it's about a 5-minute knocking, pounding on the door, pounding on the side of the house.
You could see inside the residence, the blinds weren't pulled on the windows, they were wide open. Lieutenant Bigowet went to the driveway and was looking around the Cadillac. He put his hand up to the wheel of the front wheel of the car and said that the brake rotors were still warm. He could feel the heat coming off the rotors, which would tell me that the vehicle's been driven fairly recently.
Find a phone number for Michelle Boat and call her and see if you can get her to answer. The rotors on the Cadillac are still hot, but nobody's coming to the door. I can see through most of the house and don't see anybody.
So I went around the side of the house and I noticed that there was a light on I didn't know what the room was. I thought maybe it was a bathroom. So I pounded on the side of the house, on the siding of the house.
I think she's in this bathroom back here. I can see a little bit of movement, but I can't. The blinds are pulled.
About 30 seconds after that, Lieutenant Bigowet yelled for me and said that she was coming to the door. So I went to the front porch of the residence.
83, I just confirmed with Marion County, they have the same number.
Yes, I was in the shower. What do you need?
Police have caught up with Michelle Boat. She appears calm and collected. They know they need to find out if she's connected with the murder of Tracy Mondabaugh. In Pella, Iowa, police have begun an investigation into the brutal murder of 47-year-old Tracy Mondabaugh. The main person of interest in the investigation is Michelle Boat, whose silver Cadillac was seen leaving the scene of the crime. Police have arrived at Michelle's home, and after some time, she's finally opened the door.
the same number. That was the number she booked in.
Yes, I was in the shower. What do you need?
She opened the door and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And I asked her if she could step out first, and then I changed my mind because she was in a robe and all that. I asked her if she minded if we stepped inside the residence.
She claims to not know why they're there. She was just taking a shower. Ultimately, officers go inside and speak with Michelle, and she told them that she didn't know anything about what had happened to Tracy.
They knew differently. They knew that her car was seen leaving the scene. Additionally, Deputy Bigowit goes and looks at the vehicle. There's blood on the outside of the vehicle, and the brakes on the vehicle are still warm. So we knew her story, what she was telling us, didn't match the physical evidence at the scene.
Police moved to secure Michelle Boat's residence.
They were obviously very concerned about maintaining anything of evidentiary value because, at this point, it's really looking like Michelle Boat is a person who might have been responsible for Tracy's death.
I went into the basement first, and there was a storage area, pretty decent sized storage area in the basement of the house. And that was where I heard something. I couldn't see much. It was pretty dark. I had my flashlight and I couldn't find a light switch.
And you got to imagine, if you're an officer going down there, you don't know exactly what's going on. You're walking into pitch black. He actually hears the machine going, and it somewhat startles him.
I heard some movement back in the darkness, and I just announced, "Police department, if you're back there, come out." And nobody came out, so I continued forward and realized that the sound I was hearing was the washing machine.
But the contents of the machine proved to be of interest.
There's just one outfit in the washing machine, which is a little peculiar. Nobody usually washes just one pair of pants and one shirt or whatever. So he noticed that, and that ended up being a crucial piece of evidence.
Police believe they have enough to warrant them taking Michelle into custody.
Michelle Boat was in custody within 20 minutes. There wasn't the concern that we have a killer on the loose or that this was a random act of violence.
We decided to arrest Michelle Boat on a violation of a no contact order that night, and that was brought on by, I went to Vermeer Corporation and requested to look at their security footage. When I was reviewing that, I found video of Michelle Boat's silver Cadillac following the red F-150 that Tracy was driving. The video shows Michelle sitting in the same parking lot as the victim and Nick and watching them for about a half an hour. And then once the truck leaves, Michelle pulls out and follows the truck. Shortly thereafter, we got the phone call at the police department of the situation that was going on. That was when we started putting together that this is first-degree murder because she had this planned out. She stalked Tracy and then killed her.
The investigators now call in the Division of Criminal Investigations, known as the DCI.
Certain law enforcement agencies, and especially in smaller communities, don't have access to all of the things that DCI does. And so when we're able to make a phone call to them when something like this happens, we inherit a wealth of resources for the investigation.
Just knowing that people that deal with these types of situations on a more regular basis are able to come and back us up on a case like this is a huge relief when you're in the middle of this situation and wondering what the next step is.
When I arrived at the Pella Police Department, I already knew that we had 2 crime scenes at that time. Several search warrants were already underway, and Michelle Boat was already at the police department.
It is time to question Michelle in depth.
Michelle maintained that she didn't have anything to do with the injuries that Tracy had to her chest or her hands. She claimed not to have seen Tracy that evening. Michelle maintained that she had just gone out to get some food, realized that the line was too long at the burger place, and turned around and came home. But that she had nothing to do with the murder at all or anything that happened to Tracy.
To To the police, Michelle Boat's reactions are more than strange.
When ultimately law enforcement tells her that Tracy has been hurt severely and Tracy is dead, Michelle gets this eerie smile on her face, and she looks at him and goes, "Oh, well, I guess the Lord works in mysterious ways." And to me, that was such a telling comment.
It was incredibly chilling. That statement just showed to me a complete lack of remorse for what had happened. That in some ways, I think, was her saying that, that she was somehow justified in what she did because this woman had interfered with her husband.
As a prosecutor, I immediately thought that's something we're going to use at trial. As a human being, I thought, wow, that's really this woman's mindset.
Police are also uncovering more about Michelle and her life.
She was kind of a normal person, best we could tell. She had worked, she lived in Pella, she didn't get arrested until the times leading up to this.
She never stood out to me as somebody who would go this far. In my dealings with her, she was always she was loud. She was a yelling at the top of her lungs type of person.
Something happened with her that drove her to a really dark place, and that she was just not able to deal with her marriage falling apart.
Michelle and Nick had been married for 20 years.
It was a loveless marriage for probably more than a decade, and had turned south in a hurry. He had told her that he wanted out of the relationship, that their marriage was over, and he, in fact, moved out of the home. And at that point, he said she became very angry with him.
She was so used to Nick doing whatever she said that when Nick finally left and found somebody else that made him happy, it was more than she could handle.
She largely had no criminal history, but then in the months leading up to the murder had kind of started popping up on Pella Police Department's radar. She assaulted Nick at one point, which resulted in a protective order being in place, and then Michelle continued to violate that protective order.
I think for 50-some years, she was just an ordinary person. But there was certainly something lingering inside her that caused her to, and I'm not even going to say snap, because I don't think she snapped. I think she did exactly what she wanted to do. She absolutely had the personality of a sociopath who was driven and wasn't going to stop until she achieved her goal. And that was the death of Tracy Mondabaugh.
Investigators now have their prime suspect in custody. As they put their case together, Michelle's motive starts to become clear: jealousy. In May 2020, in Pella, Iowa, detectives are learning more and more about the events surrounding the murder of 47-year-old Tracy Mondabaugh. They have Michelle Boat, the estranged wife of Tracy's boyfriend Nick, in custody. Pella police have called in the Division of Criminal Investigations, and Agent Elizabeth Miller is now at the center of the inquiry.
One of the first things that Special Agent Miller did was recognize that she wanted to get photographs of Michelle Boat's body. And so we photographed Michelle Boat head to toe. And at first, there was a slight wound to one of her fingers, a laceration, but barely visible to the human eye, and a little bit of discoloration. And she had a small laceration on her face, but literally that was it. It was not anything that would lead you to believe this person was just involved in a violent attack.
But there is more to come from the examination of Michelle.
About 36 hours later, on May 20th, is when I took the second set of photographs. At this point, you could see a large bruise on her upper arm, and just more injuries were apparent than they were the day before. Bruises can take a little while to show up. So when I don't see an injury from the first set of photographs, and then the second time that you go and document someone's body, and there's a whole set of injuries, it says that there was an altercation.
Police seek permission to conduct a search of Michelle's home.
A team of law enforcement go in the house and searched it thoroughly. Obviously we were looking for a knife or some kind of sharp object because we were thinking that may have caused the death. Obviously we didn't know for sure at that point, but anything with blood on it or hair.
A calendar in the house tells its own story.
Tracy was documenting the amount of days that Nick had left her. It went from 1 day's gone to 69 days gone. She was definitely keeping track of how long he had left.
The examiners make an extraordinary discovery on Michelle's vehicle.
One of the things that was unusual, when we look at the vehicle that Michelle Boat was driving, attached to the windshield wiper was a black choker necklace. And inside that choker, or weave through it, is Tracy Mondaball's hair. So during this struggle, somehow, Michelle Boat must grab at Tracy's neck, pulls the necklace and tosses it. And for whatever reason, and I'm glad it happened, it attached by the magnet that held it together to her windshield wiper and made it all the way home, still attached.
It just all fit what exactly had happened. That there was obviously a violent struggle, and Michelle at some point threw the necklace towards her car.
And there is more in the car which supports the investigators' developing case against Michelle Boat.
There were several pieces of evidence which suggested that Michelle Boat didn't just decide in some moment of rage that she was going to kill Tracy. I mean, first of all, she had everything that she needed for murder in her car. Rubber gloves, binoculars, there's a few other things in there that clearly showed that Michelle Boat was thinking about doing something bad.
But police are about to find the most damning piece of evidence.
Lieutenant Bigwit noticed that when they were in the bathroom that the toilet kept running. That caught his attention, and I believe he lifted the top of the tank, saw something in there. It was a towel with a set of rubber gloves with one fingertip missing. I went to the crime lab straight away from the scene, and then just like the rubber glove tip from near where Tracy Mondabaugh's body was found, those were taken to the lab too and matched. And you don't need a medical degree to look at the rubber glove and see that it fit the tip that was found at the scene.
That absolutely connected the crime scene with Michelle Boat's residence. It was a perfect fracture match for the tip of the latex glove at the crime scene and the glove found in the toilet tank at Michelle's residence.
Police are still searching, however, for one elusive piece of evidence: the murder weapon.
We walked for miles around this town. We worked long and hard trying to find that weapon and were never able to. We did take some knives from the residence that could have been in there. I'm not sure, but I would like to know where the knife was.
The investigating team dig deeper, and they find out much more about Michelle and her motivation.
There was quite a bit of digital evidence. Michelle Boat was convinced that Tracy Mondabaugh was the source of all of her marital problems. I think that she had worked herself into some view of what was going on, that if Tracy were gone, that her life would be normal again. I think in many ways, Michelle Boat believed that she was the victim in this circumstance, that someone had come and taken her husband, and she was not going to allow that to happen.
Michelle somehow found Tracy's ex-boyfriend on Facebook and sent him a message saying, hey, you should go get your girlfriend back. She's with my husband, and if you go get Tracy back, then I'll get Nick back. I think in her head, she felt that if she removed Tracy from the situation, that Nick would come back to her.
Even her phone calls from jail, when she originally gets arrested, she's totally confused by why Nick hasn't visited her at jail, because Tracy's gone now. Where else would he go? Of course he would come back to her.
Michelle's stalking had become an obsession.
There was evidence that Michelle had been trying to track Tracy down. She followed Tracy one time to Ottumwa, and the police had to be called down there. So it was clear that Michelle was interested in knowing where Tracy was, and she was clearly filled with rage towards Tracy.
When you lose your identity and potentially lose a major source of your income, you feel helpless and discarded, and everything you've built your whole life around is gone. And so that's her rage. She couldn't let it go.
When voice messages from Michelle to Nick surface, it's clear that Michelle's intense rage had reached a dangerous level, and that her behavior had become unpredictable.
You know, ignoring me isn't going to do you any good. Because sooner or later, I'm going to find and I'm going to kill her. And then you're going to feel the pain that I feel right now. Being over after 20 years of marriage. Well, a woman scorned.
They were awful. Michelle had left, I think it was something in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 voicemail messages, and Nick had chosen to save them.
They were from weeks earlier, all explaining that how upset Michelle was about Nick leaving and dating Tracy, talking about Tracy in a derogatory way, and quite frankly, laying out her plan, and that was to harm Tracy.
I don't think you have any idea what I'm capable of. And neither does she. Because she's going to die. One way or another. I'll kill her. Might take me a little while. I'll do it.
You know, these messages sometimes are just 15 seconds of screaming. Sometimes she's played songs. And sometimes she's talking. And when she's talking, the voice messages made everyone in our office, the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
I can't wait till I find her. Oh man, she's gonna pay.
It's not just the words, it's the tone, the hate, the anger is palpable, and it's chilling.
The motivation was clear, and that was that she definitely wanted to harm Tracy and, do serious harm to her.
She messed with the wrong mama.
Police have their killer. Now they need to piece together the events that led to the jealousy-motivated murder of Tracy Mondabaugh. Police in Iowa are continuing their investigation into the murder of 47-year-old Tracy Mondabaugh. They've arrested Michelle Boat, the estranged wife of Tracy's boyfriend Nick. Now they're trying to piece together Michelle's movements on the day of the killing.
She maintained she had left to go get dinner, and then when she got to the drive-thru at the Culver's, the line was too long, so she drove back home. The problem was, she was missing about an hour from her timeline. Her story just didn't make sense.
I believe that Michelle Boat had decided she was going to kill Tracy. She didn't know exactly when or where, but it was something that had been growing in her mind over the course of those 69 days since Nick left, and especially since the time that she realized that Tracy was part of the equation. And so I think probably that evening she did go to try to get something to eat, and she noticed the truck, she saw who was driving it, and I think at that point she just realized, this is my chance.
The CCTV footage which police recover becomes key to progressing the investigation.
We ended up through investigation finding that Michelle had been following Tracy around town for quite a while that evening. It started at Burger King.
Tracy pulls into the Burger King drive-thru at 7:20 p.m.
Michelle followed Tracy to the Burger King and parked in the parking lot of the strip mall a ways away so Tracy would not have noticed her. You can see her on surveillance footage from the Burger King and from the Culver's surveillance footage get out of her car and then go to the trunk compartment.
Michelle Boat had, as we called it, kind of a murder kit. She had rubber gloves, she had a hammer, she clearly had a knife, she had a crowbar. She had all of those things with her in that vehicle. I think some of those things were located in the trunk of her vehicle. That's why while she was waiting for Michelle, she got ready, she armed herself, she prepared. She followed her.
The next stop is the Vermeer facility where Nick works.
You first see Tracy pull in to Vermeer, and then less than 40 seconds later, Michelle Boat pulls in.
What we see is Tracy pulling into the parking lot, driving the truck she was found in, and meeting Nick. And Michelle pulls in sort of behind them. Our theory was she was trying not to be detected by Nick and Tracy. Michelle was sitting there watching them the whole time. She waited a half an hour and watched them eat dinner. He kissed Tracy goodbye, and they parted ways, and that was the last time that he ever saw her.
That's what fueled this whole thing, is the realization that this is really over. In that moment when she realized it was really over, having seen them in that parking lot and having a passionate kiss that Michelle hadn't had from him in years, and that was the kindling that lit the fire.
The vehicles leave, and once again, Tracy's vehicle pulls out of Vermeer. Michelle is following, and then just down the road, probably half a mile or so away, there's security cameras on the backside of a church that identify both vehicles driving away.
Tragically, police believe that the final stop is murder.
From all the evidence, it appears that Tracy Mondabaugh pulls into the parking spot, turns the car off, but before she unhooks her seatbelt, she's attacked. At that point, we believe that Michelle Boat, clearly wearing gloves and armed with a knife, attacks, and at that point, that's when the eyewitness, and what I call kind of the sound witness, hears what's going on.
Tracy was found still wearing her seatbelt, and that to me was one of the most critical pieces of evidence because it was very telling about what had happened. Knowing that Michelle Boat was still in her seatbelt told me something I think that was critical, and that was that this was all one altercation, that there was no break in the fight, that likely when Michelle Boat approached Tracy that she had a knife with her, that she didn't leave to go get the knife or leave to put rubber gloves on, that she approached with the knife, and I think that really said a lot about her intent, what she meant to do when she got there.
DNA evidence allows investigators to connect all the dots.
We were able to use DNA to tie the two separate areas of town together through the DNA from the crime scene to Michelle Boat's residence and back.
That's what linked her to the scene. There weren't any eyewitnesses that could tell who she was. So yes, the DNA was very important to that aspect.
Michelle Boat's vehicle had a piece of jewelry with magnets on it. It was like a choker, and that had black hair that came back as Tracy Mondabaugh's DNA on that hair. There were blood splatters all over the side of the Cadillac and in multiple different areas around the car that all came back as Tracy Mondabaugh's DNA.
The rubber glove was found wrapped up in a towel in the toilet tank. It did have Tracy's blood DNA on it, and it did match up with the rubber glove tip that was found at the crime scene, which also had Tracy's DNA on it.
Tracy Mondabaugh fought like hell. She had inside her hands Michelle Boat's hair. So her ability to, even in death, be certain that she was going to bring her killer to justice, she fought back, and she fought back in a way that allowed us to use what she found to advance our case.
As police prepare their prosecution for trial, they believe they have a very good case.
Once we saw that she followed Tracy, that and the nature of the attack, the fact that we had a knife used, it was close combat, for lack of a better term, and multiple stabs, because we knew that there was the injury that killed her and the injury to her hand, that in my mind this was murder in the first degree. This was premeditated homicide with malice aforethought. Every one of the things that she did was a free will choice that she made on her own, to the point that she plunged a knife into Tracy's heart.
I'm gonna kill her. The that you're sleeping with, she messed with the wrong mama.
All of the evidence that existed in this case, and you didn't have to believe all of it. You could just believe any one of it, and you would find Michelle Boat guilty.
This physical evidence, it eliminates the plausibility of being able to argue that your client wasn't there or that this wasn't them. That was when we knew we had to pursue a manslaughter defense, or a lesser included defense.
Given the relationship between the parties involved, the trial was always going to be an emotional one.
She kept it together fairly well. And I'm not going to say she was persuasive, but she was at times sympathetic. I mean, you're married to a person for 20 plus years, and they all of a sudden tell you, somewhat out of the blue, blindsiding you, that they want out of this relationship. And while you still are dealing with the emotions of maybe I can win that person back, you realize they've already moved on to someone else. I think for Michelle, it was just too much, too quick, and she wasn't going to tolerate it.
I think at that point she was still playing a part. When we were testifying, there was not a whole lot of emotion. When she testified or Nick testified, there was a lot of emotion on her part, or what appeared to be emotion.
I think that Michelle did the best she could to try to manipulate the facts into what would help her, but given what I knew about what the evidence was and what she said, they didn't coincide with each other.
The jury reaches a guilty verdict within 45 minutes.
I felt relieved more than anything else, because I think the truth is that Michelle Boat killed Tracy Mondabaugh, and she had planned it, and she meant to do it. And just to finally have the jury say, that's what we think happened too, it was a good feeling.
Having a first-degree murder verdict is always a great form of justice. However, it still took a loss of life to get that verdict.
Sentencing was about 8 weeks later, give or take, and honestly, I think it probably took less than 15 minutes, which was amazing. And Michelle Boat is now going to spend the rest of her natural-born life in prison.
Michelle receives her sentence. But was justice done in this case?
I think justice exists. If it didn't, my job would be meaningless if I didn't find that there was justice in it. But in order to get justice, something bad has to happen.
In a sort of cold way in my job, the file's closed. So there's that, but I bet if you ask that question to Tracy's family or Nick, they probably have a different answer for you. I'm sure they're probably still dealing with a lot.
There's nothing that any of us can do to bring Tracy Mondabaugh back. That's what would be justice, is be able to snap your fingers and all of a sudden bring a person back to life. But to the extent of what we're allowed to do under our criminal justice system, the jury got it right. Michelle Boat's exactly where she deserves to be.
I think Michelle made a choice to take the life of someone she deemed was a threat to her marriage. She did not show any remorse. I don't know if I would say cold-blooded killer, but I don't think that she feels bad about what she did.
It's just a reminder to me that people who are seemingly normal, seemingly, good people, can be capable of really bad things. It's so hard not to just think, what if? What if Michelle just would have taken a second to breathe and turn her car around that day, that Tracy'd still be alive? It's sad to see how all of the circumstances came together for Tracy to lose her life.
The murder of Tracy is a case with jealousy at its heart, solved by a dedicated team.
I would describe this case as good old-fashioned police work. The way that Pella PD was so quick to find Michelle and to take control of that situation.
It just shows that even in a town like Pella, very small compared to a lot of towns and cities, and we don't deal with this very often, but when we do have something like this happen, we're still able to step up and take care of the job.
You don't ever forget the murder cases. You don't forget the big ones. And I think that's absolutely true. I'm going to remember Tracy Mondabaugh for the rest of my life.
October 12, 2016, Newcastle, England. A young woman is brutally murdered inside her home.
Please, I've just come back to my flat and the door was locked, so I crawled through the window and my flatmate's covered in blood in the bathroom.
Police respond to the scene and a murder investigation is launched. It becomes apparent that the victim has previously been in contact with the police.
You could hear in that call the sheer terror in her voice.
It says at the bottom he won't contact, this will be the last I hear from him, but he's said that a lot of times and he never does seem to stop.
Police immediately identify the victim's ex-boyfriend as someone they would like to interview.
Every case of murder is terrible, but this is one that will live with me for my entire life. I've never encountered a case with a defendant so callous and manipulative.
He basically just would not accept that the relationship was over.
If he couldn't have her, nobody could.
This is the heart-rending story of Alice Ruggles, how her killer's escalating behaviour should have raised red flags, and how tragically her death could have been avoided.
I don't think I've ever encountered a case when there were so many missed opportunities to stop him killing Alice and for Alice to be protected.
This is the worst stalking case that I have come across.
There's this horrible pause where it dawns on her that he's not going to be arrested.
Christmas Eve 1991, Leicestershire. Alice, a beautiful baby girl, is born to Clive Ruggles and Sue Hill.
We live in a small village in Leicestershire. It's called Langton. There's only about 150 people live here. We've lived here since all our children were born. We were a close-knit family. We had 4 children, and Alice was the third of our 4 children.
Alice was bubbly, cheerful. She wanted to be everybody's friend, and when she was a young teenager, she was the person everybody wanted to be friends with, and so she'd walk in the room and she just attracted people, and she just was very, very happy.
She always had this incredible empathy. I can remember that even from a fairly young age. She'd sort of work out how you were thinking and what you were thinking, and if you were depressed or something. And she'd, if she detected that, she'd come out with some ridiculous joke or anecdote. She'd always be trying to cheer you up. And she'd succeed. And she became one of those people who would lighten things, and she would come into a room full of people and there was a bit of an atmosphere. She'd just get everyone going and laughing. So she had a real talent. Empathetic was the word. Alice was very close to her elder sister Emma. They would do many things together as sisters do. They had different interests, and Emma was always very good at sport, and Alice always liked sport, but she struggled to find a sport that Emma wasn't inherently better at. And she eventually found that. She went on a PGL course when she was about 11, I think, from school, and discovered fencing. And Emma had tried it once and hated it. And I think that may have been a motivation for Alice, but whatever. But she actually got really, really good at fencing, and she started to train, and she became eventually a member of the East Midlands squad, the youth squad, and would travel around doing fencing matches.
She absolutely loved fencing, and she decided that was going to be her thing. After a couple of years, she was the Leicester champion for her age, and she won the competition for that. A couple of years later, she won the adult competition for Leicestershire as well. She was also the East Midlands champion for a long time as well, so she's quite successful at it. And it was such an important thing in her life that was how she chose where to go to university. So instead of looking at where does the course I want to do best, she was looking at where does the course I want to do, but also has a very, very good fencing club. And that is why she ended up at Northumbria University in Newcastle.
When Alice decided to go to university, she was influenced in, I think, where she was going with a degree. She was in a family with kind of scientific engineering side. In fact, most of our others landed up in different fields of engineering, effectively. Alice decided, because she also had this artistic flair, she decided that she was going to do a degree in product design, which sort of mixes soft engineering with the sort of artistic design side. But once she got to Newcastle, she discovered that she loved the place. And so she did her 4 years of her degree there. But when she finished, she decided that Newcastle was somewhere she wanted to stay.
She then got a job with Sky working on the telephone, so her job was to pick up the phone and try and persuade you that actually you didn't want to cancel your subscription. You actually wanted to subscribe to Sky Sports and Movies Plus or all the other things that you needed to do. And she did enjoy that job too, because overall Alice was a people person. She loved talking to people and getting to know them and being with them. Alice was very happy. It was interesting because she liked to be in a relationship with someone, and when she was working at Sky, she wasn't in a relationship with anyone, but she was totally happy with how she was, and that was a really good sign that the job was right for her, because it didn't matter that she wasn't in a relationship. It just meant that she could get on with life. You know, at one point we're sort of seeing it that she's the absolute peak of her life because everything's going well. She's really happy, her job's going well, she's got a lovely flat, she's sharing with some people she likes, she's got so many friends that she just was really happy.
She always loved the idea of travelling, and she got the opportunity in 2015. A friend of hers, Jen, was planning a trip to Sri Lanka, so she spent these 2 weeks in Sri Lanka with Jen. And she absolutely loved it, and they had a lovely time. And of course, being of their age and generation, they were sharing pictures and other things on social media. Now, Jen had a friend at university who still followed her on social media, and his name was Dylan. But he messaged Jen to say, "Oh, I've seen your friend, and could you put her in touch with me?"
He was looking at the Facebook photographs that Jen posted on the holiday, and he messaged her and said that the girl she was with was the most naturally beautiful person he'd seen, and could they introduce them? And at the time, Dylan was a serving soldier, and he was actually in Afghanistan on a non-combat role. I thought that this was someone Alice had met and was actually seeing quite a lot of, but in fact, Alice hadn't met him. And this happened in October, where they started talking on Facebook, and they got on really well and chatted a lot. And he was obviously quite lonely because he was a soldier serving abroad, and so it was nice for him to chat to Alice.
When Alice came home for Christmas that year, we got the impression that he was a boyfriend, the way she talked about him. What we didn't realise that she'd never actually ever met him.
Alice and Dylan's relationship accelerates quickly, and there are troubling signs.
The relationship is becoming very intense very quickly, bearing in mind they've never physically met in person.
It wasn't until January that they actually met face to face, and yet by December, Alice had changed her Facebook status from being single to being in a relationship.
Christmas Eve was Alice's birthday, and even on her birthday she was concerned about staying in touch with him, and I think he sent her a couple of messages about seeing other people, which upset her rather.
And I remember her saying, I said to her, "Where's Jen? Have you seen Jen recently?" And she said, "Oh, I'm not friends with Jen anymore." She said, "We had an argument." She said, "Harry says I must never speak to her again." And that rang a massive alarm bell for me, that, that's not right at all, that someone should tell you who you can be friends with. What I didn't realise was that Dylan had actually engineered the argument between them, and he'd fuelled it, and it was a really effective way of isolating her from her friends.
January 2016, Newcastle, England. Online daters Alice Ruggles and Tremaine Dillon meet for the first time in their 3-month relationship. Dylan is on leave from his army tour in Afghanistan.
He came down to Newcastle and stayed with Alice for a week, and she said they had an absolutely wonderful time, and that he was lovely, and he took her out, and he was very gentlemanly, and he paid for things. And then they had a week in Edinburgh, and they had a lovely time there as well. They saw all the sights of Edinburgh, where Alice had never been before, and it was a lovely time.
Certainly after they'd spent those 2 weeks together in January, I think she was besotted with him.
Alice rang me at that time and said, "Mum, he's just amazing. I actually think he is the one."
When Dylan finishes his tour in Afghanistan a few months later, Alice brings him to meet her parents.
We first met him together with Alice. It was on the May Bank holiday weekend. He was a personable enough lad.
Tremaine had been brought up in India. He was of a Sikh background.
He was an only child. He talked about there being servants to the family, so they're obviously reasonably affluent. But he also talked about how spoiled he was. And he did say, "I always get my own way. I always get whatever I want." He was obviously quite westernised because his Indian accent was barely present, and I was actually quite surprised to discover he actually was Indian because he just sounded like he'd lived in Britain all his life.
He was at university, I think, in India, then finished 2 years of his university education in the UK, in Edinburgh.
He joined up with the British Army because that was the only way that he could stay in Britain.
This clean-cut image, this is somebody who's got a responsible job. He's ticking all the boxes in terms of his career, notwithstanding his occupation and his background, you know, in terms of how he is with Alice, the positive comments, the praise. This is a good, decent person.
I remember when he left the house that we both said to each other, "What do you think then?" And Clive said, yeah, he was just trying to say what he wanted us to hear. And that was really good description of what he was like, in the sense that he just wanted us to think he was going to look after Alice and he was going to be kind and nice to her.
That first weekend, everything was fine, but they came down again for the second bank holiday weekend. And by that time, only 3 or 4 weeks later, things seemed to have changed a little bit. And it was odd because I remember the fact that he spent an awful lot of time trying to buy a car on his phone and basically ignoring her. And she was visibly upset by that. That I suppose was the first sign that there's something not quite right here, because he wasn't giving her the attention that you'd think he would, especially in front of her parents. He just seemed to be kind of absorbed in his own thing.
As the relationship continues, Dylan's behaviour becomes more cruel.
He'd quite often make not very nice comments about her, so comments about the fact that she had a bit of a big nose and that she had hairy arms and all sort of things that he was really trying to undermine her confidence.
They're spending all their time together, and friends and family have noticed that Alice isn't sort of available in the same way that she was previously, not going out unless they're together. Things weren't as happy as they perhaps should have been or were initially. They're using each other's devices, tablets, phones, you know, so he has access to Alice's iPad or tablet or phone, and of course any accounts that are on there legitimately at the time.
Dylan's behaviour is becoming increasingly more jealous and controlling.
I remember Alice saying, "Mum, he rings me up every morning and he wants me to send a photograph so he can see what I'm wearing. And that sounds lovely and caring." And that was how Alice saw it. She'd message him from a party and saying, "I'm at a party, you know, it's really lovely." And then he'd come and pick her up and she's like, "Mum, it's really lovely, he just wants to see me. He's just come down, driven all this way from Edinburgh to see me." And so when you're in a controlling relationship, it's quite hard to see that. It's quite hard to think, actually, I'm being controlled here. Dylan said to Alice, he said, "Don't worry, I've got some money. I'll buy a flat that you can live in." And this was another worry for me, because in my mind, they'd only just started this relationship, and there's something wrong with someone saying, "I'm going to buy a flat for you to live in." It just didn't sound right at all. But fortunately, Alice found somewhere to live with a friend from work, and so she didn't end up living in his flat under his control.
A good way to describe his behaviour is one of possession. And of course, you don't possess people, you possess objects. And when we start to see those signs that somebody is becoming dehumanised, I own you, you are a possession, you are chattel. It starts to open up those ideas about power, control, ownership. We start to see this bind being created in a relationship, where people's vulnerabilities, their niceness, their good nature is sort of used against them in the most abhorrent way. And we start to see those signs, changes in Alice's behaviour, arguing with her friends, falling out, losing weight, not being this happy person that she previously was. Something is going wrong here.
It's difficult as our family, because when we look at Alice, we don't see someone who's controlled. We see a really strong, independent, lovely, bubbly person. How can that person have been controlled? And it's really hard to accept that that might have happened to her.
It's hard to conceive how affected someone must feel in that situation. I mean, every moment of your life, in every different way, this other person either knows where you are, who you're with, or they might know. I mean, this is now controlling your entire life, and that's how it was for Alice.
24-year-old Alice Ruggles is in a relationship with Treman Dillon. The couple visit Alice's family in Cornwall, and Alice reveals that Dillon has been keeping secrets.
The family have a history, long-standing tradition of going on holiday, I think, to Cornwall.
Alice had decided she'd had enough of him before that holiday started. And the reason is that Alice had a message on Facebook from somebody who she didn't know, who said, there's something about your boyfriend you need to know, and that he's been on Tinder and he's looking for other girls, and he found me and he wanted to go in a relationship with me. So I looked at his Facebook and I found that he was in a relationship with you, and you need to know that that's what he's doing.
She had found out that he was speaking to other girls using dating apps and Facebook because somebody contacted Alice. By the way, I've seen that you're in a relationship with this person, and FYI, he's been contacting me.
And Alice tackled him about it, and he first of all denied it completely, and then he said, oh, somebody else had set up a fake account. His story had changed again, and he knew exactly who it was, and he'd done it because he didn't like Alice and he wanted to cause a rift between him and Alice. And I remember Alice saying, I don't think he actually knows what the truth is, Mum. I don't think he even knows what the concept of truth is. He just says whatever he thinks you want to hear at that point.
Alice did end the relationship. That was the line that was crossed, if you like. But this wasn't a clean, amicable break. This was anything but.
He basically just would not accept that the relationship was over. He basically messaged her all the time. So her phone would be buzzing and then buzzing again and then buzzing again.
It was relentless. It was constant.
Dillon at this point has been rejected. And to somebody like him, a narcissist, rejection is hugely insulting.
Dillon is stalking Alice online, and given his knowledge of her conversations, she believes he's hacking her social media.
He did pretty much had unfettered access to her Facebook. I think he also had access to WhatsApp through the web-based service as well. So he's privy to who Alice is communicating with. He's privy to conversations between Alice and her mum Sue via WhatsApp. And of course they're discussing things, her thoughts, her feelings, and also her other online activity. Who is she looking at on Facebook? Who's she communicating with? And actually she is speaking to another male on Facebook.
Alice had been starting a new relationship with a man called Mike, who was a colleague of her sister's.
And almost instantly, Dillon found out about this, and Alice had told nobody about it. She'd only talked to Emma about it. So how did Dillon know?
He says, I know you belong to another man now. So it's a very clear sign that he has dehumanized Alice. Mike knows everything. Alice, has explained the situation, and when Dillon contacts him saying that Alice is cheating on him, it tells you something very clear about what he thinks. This is far from over.
Alice's new relationship is another trigger, and Dillon's behaviour escalates again.
It was Emma, more than any of us, who began to think of this as stalking. We didn't know about the level of danger that was involved in this. We, like Alice, assumed that at some point he would just give up and move on and go away. As soon as the control within the relationship is broken because the relationship is ended, then the perpetrator needs to exert that control in other ways. It's a trigger that actually makes the need for control worse. And of course then the stalking is an attempt to regain that control.
Alice has never been in a situation like this before. She tries to be reasonable. She tries to be nice, to let somebody down gently, to appease them. But that isn't working. Dylan had in his possession intimate photographs of Alice and used these as a way to threaten her. This is to coerce her, to blackmail her, if you like, back into a relationship. If you don't get back with me, I will publish these images. All your friends and family will see the type of person you are. Now, for Alice, who's got loads of friends on social media, for private images like that to be published would have been devastating.
Dylan's sinister behaviour continues when he deliberately scares Alice when she is home alone.
On the 30th of September, Alice is having a night in. She's not going out with her friends. She gets a weird phone call from him telling her that he's in the garden. And Alice said, "What, my garden?" And he said, no, some gardens in Edinburgh that they'd visited. And Alice thought that was really strange. And then a little bit later, the doorbell rang. And when she went to look, there was nobody there. And that kept happening. And she was really, really unnerved at this point. And she's been quite anxious about locking the flat, making sure all the windows are shut for quite a long time because of the way he's been behaving. Eventually, she goes to bed, and when she goes to bed, she hears this knocking on the window. And so she opens the curtains, and he's standing there having put some flowers and chocolates on the windowsill, and he's stepping back from the window.
During that journey home, he leaves a message for Alice, which is to a phone, a voicemail, in which he says he just wants to prove to her that he won't harm her, and he repeats about 5 times an assertion that he doesn't want to kill Alice.
They were very strange messages, in fact, because she'd never been saying to him, to his face, "I think you're going to kill me or hurt me." So why did he keep saying this to her? And actually, the way we advanced that as a theory was that he was basically saying to her, "These are the things I am going to do to you." You know, he was expressing there what he was thinking, that he was going to hurt her, that he was going to kill her, and that he knew that she would be frightened of that.
Petrified, Alice phones the police and explains what's been happening.
Good evening, Northumbria Police. How can I help you?
Hi there. I just need a bit of advice, really, more than anything. So I split up with my boyfriend about 3 months ago. Since then, I know that he's hacked into my Facebook and also my phone. He's been sending me a lot of messages, even though I've asked him not to contact me. And then tonight, I had a knock at my door. And he'd sent me a message saying, "I've been in the garden since 5. I had a knock at my door. And then when I went and looked, I've got like a little, the thing that you can look through. And there was no one there. And then it happened again 2 or 3 times. And then he's come round the back, knocked on my bedroom window at the back of my flat, it's a ground floor flat. He's been outside and he's like left some flowers and chocolates on the outside windowsill, and he walked off. He's not done anything, but I'm concerned. I've been putting off, my friends have been telling me to call the police. I've been putting it off, but I just feel a bit shaken up tonight.
It can be classed as harassment.
That is fundamentally wrong. At that first opportunity, which may be the only opportunity for us, the police, to get this right, we potentially have set that case on a course towards catastrophe.
For the director of the police to know, and we can issue them with a PIN notice, which means if he ever comes near you again or contacts you again, he'll be arrested. We'll see if we can make an appointment to come and see you.
Yeah.
In the morning.
Yeah.
We'll get the details.
Thank you.
So the idea is that we'll come and speak to you, Alice, and will go and give him this official document that if he breaches this document, if he contacts you further, then he will be arrested. It sounds really sort of attractive. What it actually does is create this false sense of security.
After this, Alice is reassured. She's been told that if the PIN notice is taken out, if he contacts her again, he'll be arrested, and she believes this. That was on the 1st of October, and in those days that followed, she became happier at work, she regained her vitality. The people at Sky noticed that she was reverting to being her old self. She felt protected. There were issues with how news about the PIN notice got through to him because he's in the military. So the decision was made to have the military tell him about the PIN. He was told about this PIN by his superiors. When he found out, he then, one of his first reactions was to send her a package. And so 7 days later, she receives a package on the 7th of October from him. And it contains, I think, a couple of T-shirts and things she'd left with him up in Edinburgh. It says in the letter to the company, I'm sending you all these things because I've found out that you've gone to the police. He's obviously, you can read between the lines of the letter, he's obviously angry about that.
As Dylan has broken the conditions of the PIN, an official document that forbids Dylan from contacting her, Alice Ruggles calls the police again.
Hi there. I've been in touch with the police. Somebody's been issued with a PIN so that they can't contact me. However, I've had a letter off them.
What was the content of the letter? Was he?
So pictures of me and him, because he's my ex-boyfriend too, like a notebook that I'd sent him when we were together, and a letter that he knows I called the police on him, and he's had everything confiscated, and all he has to himself is a pen and paper and an iPod, and explaining why he came down last Friday. It says at the bottom he won't contact me, this will be the last I hear from him, but he's said that a lot of times, and he never does seem to stop.
So do you want to call back to discuss this?
There's this horrible pause where it dawns on her that he's not going to be arrested.
Yeah, what's usually what happens with it?
Okay, well, I'll let them know you want someone to contact you back, just to discuss what can be done.
Okay. Will it be the police officer that's been dealing with my case?
I can't guarantee who it'll be. I'll let them know you've got your PIN notice there, so it's going into a breach of it. Is there best time to phone you back?
Any time really will be fine. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, bye.
Thanks, bye.
And we don't have a phone call of the callback she eventually received, because it was them then calling her. And it was a lady now on the phone, basically at some point said to her, well, what do you expect us to do about it? Arrest him? At that point, it's almost you hear the moment when she suddenly realised she's not being protected. By this stage, Alice is truly frightened of Dylan. Colleagues from Sky are bringing her home every evening to the front door in their cars. Maxine, her flatmate, is with her as much as she can, but obviously there's times when she can't be there.
A few days later, on October 12, 2016, Maxine, Alice's flatmate, returns home.
Please, I've just come back to my flat and the door was locked, so I crawled through the window and my flatmate's covered in blood in the bathroom, and she's lying covered in blood. She's blue. She's only 23. I mean, knew this was coming. Our ex is an absolute psychopath. She's put in a complaint in about her ex, and she phoned 101 at the weekend to report that he's trying to get in contact, and he says we're going to do nothing. Now this has happened.
Police teams are dispatched to Alice's home, and detectives are immediately tasked with trying to locate ex-boyfriend Treman Dylan.
By the time we got the horrible call at the door at 2 o'clock the next morning, they'd already arrested him.
October 12, 2016, Northumbria police have located Treman Dylan at his barracks in Edinburgh and are arresting him on suspicion of the murder of his ex-girlfriend Alice Ruggles earlier that evening.
So police had gone into his barracks. They caught him climbing out, attempting to climb out over the wall rather than signing out. We assume this was to go and establish his alibi.
They wore body-worn footage. That body-worn footage showed that he had scratch marks on his face and on his chest, and that those were fresh and recent scratch marks. The footage revealed the police recovering his clothing, outer and underclothing, one item at a time, making sure that it wasn't contaminated.
While Dylan is being held in Newcastle, police are busy gathering CCTV evidence and other forensic evidence in hope of linking him to the murder.
We knew that when the police had gone into the flat, they hadn't been able to find Alice's phone. And that meant that somebody had taken it, because we had seen her on her phone when she arrived back at the flat that afternoon.
Remarkably, they actually have film of Alice arriving home that day, and it transpires that if someone has a cam on their car, then even when they stop the car and turn the engine off, that continues to function for a minute or two. And so it seems that a neighbour's car was parked, and during that minute or two, after the person had left their car, Alice was dropped at home. And so that we actually have a timed video of her arriving for the last time in her flat.
She'd been in contact with her boyfriend using that phone, so somebody had taken it. And the evidence was that the phone was being used, that is, it was connecting with masts, consistent with it travelling north back to Scotland with Tremaine Dillon, and then it stopped being used altogether. But it stopped being used altogether after Alice was dead, after her body had been discovered. So we knew that that phone was with Tremaine Dillon. And that was a really important piece of evidence, because if he was telling the truth, and that he had been caught up in this tragic accident in which Alice had died, why was he stealing her phone? Why was he taking it with him back to Scotland? And why was he trying to use it? What it revealed was that he was still obsessed with who she'd been contacting, who she'd been messaging, and he was wanting to go through her phone and interrogate it.
They picked up on various CCTV cameras that are around the place, pictures of his car coming into Newcastle, driving up her road, and that's how they know that he'd arrived there and was waiting for her. The evidence soon became clear once they got all this from the CCTV. Without a doubt that he'd been there, he'd driven to her road, and later after it happened, he'd driven out of Newcastle, and with the pinging of her phone on the way out of Newcastle, it's absolutely irrefutable.
Dylan initially lies about his whereabouts and concocts multiple stories about where he was.
His first attempt was to say that he'd been shopping. He's then confronted with telephone evidence that shows that he was in Newcastle. So he then constructed his second account, was to say that he had been to the house, he had seen Alice, but that she had come outside, and that she had shouted at him, called him a creep, and scratched his face, and that he'd left. So in that second version, he said he'd left her alive and well, without any injury, and had driven back to Scotland. It was only then, when he was confronted with the fact that her blood was in his car, on his Help for Heroes bracelet, and on his clothing, that he came up with his third version of events, which was to say that Alice had accidentally killed herself with a knife in the bathroom of her home.
Dylan is formally charged with Alice's murder. From the evidence collected, investigators can now tell how the last terrifying moments of Alice's life played out.
Alice is in the living room, happily WhatsApping with Mike, in fact, because they were due to meet in 2 days. Mike was coming over, and sort of Mike's they were exchanging all this stuff about what they're going to do and all the rest of it. And then suddenly Alice's messages stopped.
He came in through the rear yard of the property and climbed in through a window. The disturbance in the bedroom suggests that Alice had seen him there, and there had been some sort of struggle in the bedroom. And the way the flat was configured, she had run for the bathroom, which of course is the only room in the flat that had a lockable door. It was at the back of the flat. So it was a place of safety, but it was unfortunately a dead end. She got into the bathroom, and there was a footprint mark on the outside of the bathroom door and some damage to the lock. And what all that suggested was that she'd got herself into the bathroom, she'd tried to lock the door while she was being pursued by Dylan, but that he had kicked the door open, forcing the lock, and then he had attacked her inside the bathroom. Dylan had knelt on her back, pulled back her hair and slit her throat, and had been drawn so deeply and with such force across her neck that in fact her spinal cord at the back of the neck had been notched by the knife.
Dylan's trial starts in April 2017. In preparation, investigators have found more digital evidence and also ex-partners of Dylan's that tell a story of jealous behaviour, control and stalking.
They all spoke of a similar pattern of behaviour, that he would form a relationship very quickly, that there would be a great intensity to that relationship, but that he would become controlling during the relationship, and that he could not cope with rejection.
He already had a legal framework in place to control and regulate his behaviour towards an ex-partner.
On the 10th of October, unbeknown to anyone at the time, he drove all the way down from his barracks, 120 miles down to Newcastle, 2-hour journey, and went after dark to her back window and photographed those windows in her flat, and then drove all the way back to Newcastle, 5-hour round journey.
I think that Harry Dillon thought that he would take his chances, that there was a chance that a jury might believe his story, that there was a chance he might be able to charm them, and so that's what he set out to do. And so we presented a very clear and compelling case. We demonstrated all of the false accounts that he'd given, and we demonstrated to the jury just how controlling and manipulative he was. But he gave evidence over the course of 5 days. He was giving evidence. 2.5 days to his advocate and 2.5 days in cross-examination. And in cross-examination, we exposed his account for the lie that it was. And we demonstrated through cross-examination just how manipulative, controlling and obsessive he was. And in fact, his evidence at trial was all an exercise in control. It was all about exerting control over Alice's family until the bitter end, taunting them effectively and tormenting them. But worse than that, it was about him saying to Alice's family, "This is your fault. If you hadn't interfered in our relationship, she would still be alive." He actually said to Alice's father at one point, "You couldn't be there to protect your daughter."
It takes the jury less than 2 hours to return a verdict.
The jury retired shortly before the lunch adjournment, and then they came back early in the afternoon and unanimously convicted Harry Dillon. His reaction to being convicted was one of a complete lack of emotion, but that's what he displayed throughout. He spent 2.5 days describing to the jury in graphic detail how this woman who he supposedly loved had bled to death in front of him. Not once did he cry, come close to shedding a tear, show any emotion.
The judge pointed out that he lied from the beginning to the end, that it was patently clear that he'd gone along intending to murder Alice.
Harry Dillon was sentenced to life imprisonment, and the judge made a recommendation that he should serve no less than 23 years in prison before he could be considered for parole.
After this justified result, what could have been different?
I don't think I've ever encountered a case when there were so many missed opportunities to stop him killing Alice and for Alice to be protected.
The family looking back may have thought, could we have done something else? Could we have stopped this? But Dylan was a maniac. He had full intent that night to come down and murder Alice, and he has still not admitted guilt for the murder that he committed, so he is still maintaining control.
I think there's still an enormous amount of ignorance about stalking and about how dangerous stalking is, about what it says about the person who's committing the offence. To get to the point where you're stalking a person in the way that Dylan was stalking Alice demonstrates that you have such disturbed thinking and such an enhanced sense of self-entitlement that you're becoming extremely dangerous. And I think we need to have much tougher sentences for stalkers. I think we need to take stalking much more seriously. And there needs to be a far deeper intervention with these people who commit these offences to stop them going on, as sadly happens, to commit murders such as this one.
What is changing to avoid more incidents like this from happening?
There has been lessons learned from Alice's murder, mandatory training for officers, for victim support staff in stalking, and training for people to understand the way stalkers behave and what increases the danger to victims.
Increasingly, the public are becoming more aware of stalking and its risks. The publicity around cases has grown in recent years. Awareness in agencies has grown. There were some national recommendations. At the time of Alice's case, the threat to disclose intimate photographs was not a specific criminal offence, so we'd made a recommendation around that. That is now in legislation.
Clive and Sue set up the Alice Ruggles Trust to raise awareness of the dangers of stalking.
We had to do something so that people didn't end up in the same position that we were in, giving poor advice to their family members and then watching them being murdered. That second phone call to the police could have saved Alice if they'd arrested him. And we wanted lessons to be learned. How do we make sure that lessons are learned from this? And it sort of made us realise that that's our job now, to make sure that lessons are learned from it. I spend quite a lot of my time talking to people about the last few months of Alice's life. And I have to make a really big effort to think that Alice's life was not just about those last few months. And that I really want to remember Alice for all the positive things rather than just really horrific things.